Good evening and welcome back. Wherever you are tonight, curled beneath a blanket, resting against a quiet pillow, or listening softly while the world outside settles into stillness, I'm truly glad you're here. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I always read them later, and there is something comforting about imagining these stories drifting across different time zones, different cities, different lives, all meeting here in the quiet. Tonight we step into the Middle Ages, but not the version painted in dull grays and careless assumptions, not the myth of filth and indifference. Instead, we step into candlelit rooms, into stone corridors warmed by tapestries, into chambers where mirrors of polished metal catch the faintest glow. Imagine a woman seated before that mirror. She lifts her hands carefully to her hairline, adjusting what others will see. In another town, steam rises gently from a public bathhouse. In a monastery, ink glides across parchment recording recipes for skin treatments, perfumes, and tonics meant to preserve beauty. Beauty in this world is not trivial. It is language. It signals status, devotion, virtue, restraint. It reveals who belongs to which class, who labors under the sun, who lives behind walls of stone. It can invite admiration or suspicion. It can be praised as harmony with divine order or condemned as vanity. And yet, it is always present. For centuries, we have repeated the idea that medieval people did not care about appearance. But history whispers something different. Manuscripts, laws, sermons, paintings all speak of a society deeply aware of how bodies looked, how clothing fell, how skin appeared in daylight. So, tonight, let the modern myths soften. Let your breathing slow. As we begin this journey, we are not here to judge, we are here to understand. Close your eyes if you wish. The candles are lit. The past is waiting. If you could step quietly into a medieval town at dusk, when the market noise has faded and only the low murmur of evening prayers remains, you might expect the world to feel rough, unadorned, uninterested in appearance. Stone walls, unpaved streets, hands marked by labor, the scene seems too practical for vanity. And yet, if you linger a little longer, if you let your eyes adjust to candlelight and shadow, you begin to notice something subtler moving beneath the surface. A woman pauses before entering the church and smooths the fabric at her sleeves. A young man straightens his belt, aware of who is watching. In an upper chamber, a polished metal mirror catches a tremor of flame as someone studies her own reflection, not with indulgence, but with calculation. Beauty is present here. It does not shout, but it breathes quietly through gesture, fabric, posture, and expectation. To understand what beautiful meant in the Middle Ages, we must first set aside the modern instinct to treat beauty as personal preference. In the medieval imagination, beauty was rarely private. It was not simply what pleased the eye. It was something woven into the structure of the universe itself. Medieval thinkers inherited from the ancient world the idea that beauty was tied to harmony, proportion, and order. The world they believed had been created according to divine design. God did not build chaos, he built structure. Therefore, what was beautiful reflected that structure. Harmony and sound symmetry in form, clarity in light. These were not aesthetic accidents. They were signs of alignment with a greater pattern. Light in particular held a quiet authority. In churches, stained glass did more than decorate. It filtered divine radiance into visible color. the glow was interpreted as sacred presence. To be luminous, to appear bright or clear, carried spiritual resonance. When medieval writers described a beautiful face, they often used the language of radiance. Skin that seemed clear, eyes that reflected light, features that appeared ordered rather than chaotic. These qualities were not trivial. They suggested inner harmony, even moral alignment. Beauty and goodness were not identical, but they were frequently imagined as neighbors. And yet the Middle Ages were not naive. People understood that appearance could deceive. A beautiful exterior did not guarantee a virtuous soul. Sermons warned against trusting the surface too easily. The very fact that moral authorities felt compelled to caution against vanity reveals something important. Beauty mattered enough to be feared. It possessed influence. It could draw attention, inspire admiration, unsettle restraint. In a world structured by hierarchy and religious discipline, anything capable of shifting attention carried power. That power was never abstract. It was social. Medieval communities were tightly knit. Villages, towns, courts, monasteries. These were spaces where identity was read immediately upon sight. Clothing, posture, grooming, complexion, and ornamentation were signals. One glance could suggest wealth, poverty, piety, marriage status, occupation. Beauty then functioned as a language. It communicated belonging. It reassured observers that order was intact. When someone appeared appropriately adorned for their rank, the social fabric felt stable. When someone appeared too adorned or not adorned enough, questions arose. Consider how deeply intertwined appearance and hierarchy were. The medieval world was structured vertically. Kings ruled by divine right. Nobles inherited land and privilege. Clergy mediated between earthly and heavenly realms. Peasants labored in fields that fed the entire system. Within this arrangement, visibility mattered. The body itself became a surface upon which status could be displayed. To look refined suggested distance from manual labor. To appear composed suggested access to time and resources. Beauty, therefore, was not merely decorative, it was economic. But beauty was also theological. The human body was believed to be created by God, yet also marked by the fall. This tension shaped how appearance was interpreted. On one hand, the body reflected divine craftsmanship. On the other, it was vulnerable to corruption and temptation. This duality meant that cultivating beauty required caution. Care for the body could be framed as stewardship, maintaining what God had made. Yet excessive attention risked crossing into pride. The line between reverence and vanity was thin, and medieval society walked it carefully. In illuminated manuscripts and courtly literature, we find descriptions of ideal figures whose features are balanced and serene. The beloved lady in a romance is often portrayed as possessing a face that is neither extreme nor irregular. Moderation is key. The Middle Ages valued proportion, not only in architecture and music, but in the body. Extremes disrupted harmony. Beauty lay in balance. Even the language of praise reflects this preference. A woman might be described as fair, but not ostentatious, graceful, but not indulgent. The ideal was controlled luminosity contained elegance. This emphasis on moderation extended beyond aesthetics into ethics, weaving itself quietly into the fabric of daily conduct. The same instinct that favored balanced features and measured adornment also valued restraint in speech, humility, in posture, and control in behavior. To appear beautiful in a socially approved way suggested not only that one possessed pleasing features, but that one understood limits. It implied awareness of how far refinement could go without tipping into excess, how elegance could remain within the boundaries of propriety. In this sense, beauty became a visible sign of self-governance. It signaled that the individual was capable of aligning outward presentation with inward discipline. Beauty was not conceived as wild self-expression, not as an unchecked display of personal desire or creativity. It was disciplined presentation shaped by the invisible lines that structured society. Garments were chosen within expectations. Gestures were moderated. Even posture carried meaning. To present oneself beautifully was to demonstrate fluency in these codes, to show that one could move gracefully within the constraints that defined community life. Excess disrupted harmony. Restraint preserved it. Thus, beauty became evidence of measured judgment, of knowing when to enhance and when to withhold. It demonstrated that a person knew how to inhabit their place within the cosmic and social order. Medieval thought did not separate the earthly from the divine. Both were layered hierarchies reflecting one another. To occupy one's station appropriately was to participate in that order rather than resist it. Beauty, therefore, was not an assertion of individual uniqueness detached from context. It was a confirmation that the individual fit within a pattern that extended upward toward heaven and outward through society. The concept may feel distant from modern ideas of authenticity, which often prize spontaneity and self-definition. Yet in the medieval worldview, identity was relational rather than self-generated. A person understood themselves through their ties to family, to rank, to faith, to community. One's appearance was part of a larger choreography of roles and expectations, a performance not of deception, but of belonging. To appear rightly was to signal that the dance of hierarchy and devotion remained intact, that each participant moved in accordance with the rhythm assigned to them. And yet within that choreography, individuality flickered. Medieval texts concerning the care of the body reveal a world attentive to detail. Compilations such as the Trotula, a medieval collection of writings on women's medicine, include sections dedicated to cosmetics and bodily care. These texts do not treat appearance as irrelevant. They provide recipes, instructions, observations. The existence of such material alone challenges the assumption that medieval people were indifferent to beauty. Instead, it suggests a culture that approached beauty with practical seriousness. Practical seriousness is an important phrase. Beauty in the Middle Ages was rarely frivolous. It intersected with health reputation and marriage prospects. A clear complexion could imply vitality. A composed presentation could influence alliances. In aristocratic circles where marriages were strategic, appearance carried diplomatic weight. Even outside the court, attractiveness could shape daily interactions. To be perceived as orderly and clean signaled reliability. In a world where community survival depended on cooperation, perception mattered. We must also remember that the medieval era spanned centuries and regions. The meaning of beauty in 12th century France was not identical to its meaning in 15th century Italy. Climate, trade, artistic movements, and political changes influenced taste. Yet, across these variations, a common thread persists. Beauty was never isolated from structure. It was always embedded in systems of belief. The church played a central role in shaping those systems. Religious art depicted saints with luminous halos and symmetrical features, reinforcing associations between light and holiness. At the same time, moral treatises warned against the dangers of excessive adornment. The message was not contradictory, it was conditional. Beauty aligned with humility could be admired. Beauty deployed for seduction or pride was suspect. The distinction lay not only in appearance, but in intention. though intention was notoriously difficult to prove. This ambiguity gave beauty an almost mystical quality, as though it existed in a space that could not be fully secured or fully condemned. It hovered delicately between blessing and danger, never settling comfortably into one category. In one moment, it could be praised as evidence of divine harmony, a visible echo of order in a world that longed for stability. In another, it could be treated as a subtle threat, capable of stirring envy, desire, or suspicion. Beauty possessed the capacity to elevate a person's standing, to draw admiration and trust, yet it also carried the risk of corruption of pride, of distraction, of moral unease. It could confirm that the world was aligned with sacred design, or it could unsettle that alignment by shifting attention and altering relationships. Perhaps it is precisely this tension that continues to fascinate us now. Medieval beauty was never neutral, never a simple attribute that existed without implication. It carried consequence not because people exaggerated its importance, but because they believed appearance participated in the larger moral and social order. Imagine again the woman before her mirror, adjusting her garment with careful hands. She is not merely smoothing fabric or correcting a fold. She is entering into that charged space where perception and meaning meet. Each movement is deliberate, shaped by awareness that she will be seen, interpreted, assessed. She understands that others will read her appearance as a sign of modesty, or pride of discipline, or indulgence of belonging, or overreach. Her presentation can affirm her family's honor, reinforcing the stability of their place within the hierarchy, or it can invite scrutiny that ripples outward beyond her alone. The mirror she holds is small, its surface imperfect, and the light that touches her face is faint. Yet the modest scale of the scene does not diminish its gravity. The stakes feel immense because what is being arranged is not only cloth, but coherence. Beauty in her world is not a matter of self-esteem or personal validation. It is about fitting into expectation, aligning with faith, inhabiting rank without excess or deficiency. It is about ensuring that what others see confirms the pattern they trust. And yet beneath this coherence, there is also desire. Medieval literature is full of longing glances and secret admiration. Courtly love poetry elevates the beloved to near mythic status. Her beauty becomes a force that inspires devotion and suffering alike. In these poems, beauty transcends practicality. It becomes almost supernatural, capable of altering a knight's courage or a poet's resolve. The language grows luminous, charged with awe. Here, beauty is not only social currency, it is emotional catalyst. This emotional dimension coexisted with the moral framework, creating a layered understanding of appearance. Beauty could be disciplined and ecstatic, regulated and celebrated. It could reinforce order and unsettle it. Such complexity resists simplification. The Middle Ages were not an era of uniform gloom. They were an era of careful negotiation. When modern culture imagines medieval beauty, it often does so through distortion, either romanticizing it into ethereal fantasy or dismissing it as irrelevant. The truth lies somewhere quieter. Medieval people like us lived within constraints. They navigated expectations. They sought harmony between how they felt and how they were seen. Their standards differed from ours, but their awareness was no less acute. To call someone beautiful in the Middle Ages was to make a statement about more than appearance. It was to speak in a language that reached beyond the surface of the face and into the invisible structures that shaped medieval life. Beauty was never an isolated compliment, never a casual remark detached from consequence. It was an assessment. It was an interpretation. It was a quiet declaration that the person before you appeared to embody proportion virtue, lineage, health, and divine favor in a way that seemed coherent and intelligible within the world as it was understood. Proportion suggested balance, not excess, not deficiency, but a measured harmony that echoed the belief that creation itself had been formed according to order. Virtue implied moral alignment, the sense that outward composure reflected inward discipline. Lineage carried the weight of inheritance of bloodlines and continuity of belonging to a recognized place within society's layered structure. Health signaled vitality and stability, a body that appeared sound and therefore trustworthy. Divine favor hovered above all these qualities, suggesting that beauty might be read as a subtle sign of blessing, a visible trace of grace. The word itself carried gravity because it connected the individual to these broader meanings. To describe someone as beautiful was to situate them within a network of expectations and interpretations. It implied that their presence did not disrupt the order of things, but rather seemed to fit within it. Beauty in this sense was not invented by the individual through personal assertion. It was acknowledged by others who shared a common framework of understanding. It was recognized, affirmed, and interpreted within a system that extended far beyond any single person's intention or desire. And so, as night settles deeper over our imagined town and the candles burn lower, we begin to see that medieval beauty was neither absent nor simplistic. It was structured, debated, admired, feared. It was a mirror held up not only to faces, but to the worldview itself. In its glow, we glimpse a society striving for order in a fragile world, finding in symmetry and light a reassurance that chaos had not won. If we listen closely beyond the echo of our own assumptions, we can hear the quiet persistence of that striving. Beauty meant harmony. Beauty meant belonging. Beauty meant visibility within a divine design. And in that meaning, steady and luminous, the medieval world revealed something enduring, the human need to be seen as fitting within the pattern of existence. There is something almost luminous about the way medieval art remembers a face. Not luminous in the modern cosmetic sense, but pale, deliberately pale, like parchment, touched by winter light. When we look at illuminated manuscripts or panel paintings from the later Middle Ages, we often notice it immediately. Women and men of rank are rendered with skin that seems untouched by sun or soil, softly bright against darker fabrics and gilded backgrounds. It is easy to assume this was merely stylistic convention, a painter's limited palette, or preference for contrast. But beneath that pale surface lies a deeper truth. In the Middle Ages, skin was not only biology, it was biography. To understand why pallor carried meaning, we must imagine the medieval landscape not from a cathedral window, but from the fields. Most people lived by agricultural labor. Days were spent under open sky, bending, harvesting, tending animals, carrying water. The sun marked the body. It darkened hands and faces. It roughened texture. Exposure was not a luxury, it was necessity. Against this background, pale skin became a visible distinction. It suggested distance from physical toil. It implied shelter indoor space, time not governed entirely by daylight labor. Pallor then did not simply reflect preference, it reflected position. But medieval society did not reduce beauty to avoidance of sunlight alone. The ideal complexion was not ghostly or drained of life. It was described in texts and poetry as fair, yet touched with gentle color. A face might be praised for clarity, for smoothness, for an even tone that seemed balanced rather than stark. The imagery is careful. Too much redness could imply imbalance. Too much pallor could suggest illness. The beauty lay in a narrow middle space where brightness and vitality coexisted. It is here that the medieval fascination with proportion returns not only in architecture and music, but in flesh. Within medical and cosmetic writings of the period, one finds instructions aimed at preserving or restoring this balance. The boundary between medicine and adornment was not rigid. Care of the skin could be framed as care of health. Ointments, washes, and preparations were recorded with attention to texture and effect. These were not indulgent fantasies. They were practical notes. They reveal a society attentive to the body's surface, aware that complexion could shift with environment, diet, or age. To tend the skin was not always to mask reality, but to manage it. And yet, even as these practices existed, carefully prepared ointments, attentive washing, deliberate preservation of clarity, the moral gaze remained vigilant, steady, and watchful. Medieval society did not abandon scrutiny simply because refinement was possible. The same culture that permitted and even documented the cultivation of a fair complexion also reserved the right to question the motive behind it. Intention mattered. A face could be tended with moderation and still be viewed with suspicion if the purpose seemed excessive. The line between stewardship and manipulation was not drawn in ink. It was drawn in perception. Was the smoothing of skin an act of maintenance, a reasonable effort to preserve what time and weather might erode? Or was it an attempt at deception? A subtle rewriting of reality meant to mislead the observer? Did enhancing one's appearance affirm harmony with social expectation, presenting oneself as balanced and composed? Or did it conceal truth, masking imperfections that were meant to be accepted as part of human frailty? These were not abstract, philosophical puzzles. They were lived questions, quietly embedded in sermons, moral reflections, and communal judgment. Such questions did not erupt dramatically. They hovered. They lingered in the background of daily life, shaping how beauty was interpreted long after the ointment had dried and the mirror had been set aside. A face could invite admiration and at the same time provoke doubt. It could signal refinement while prompting whispers about pride. Because appearance was visible and public, its meaning was never entirely under the control of the one who bore it. The observer completed the interpretation. In this way, the face became both canvas and confession. It was a surface upon which effort was displayed subtle, careful, restrained, and it was also treated as a revelation of character. What appeared smooth might suggest discipline. What appeared altered might suggest concealment. The face carried the tension between presentation and truth. It reflected not only light, but expectation. And within that reflection, beauty remained suspended between affirmation and accusation, admired, yet examined, permitted, yet continually assessed. In courts and aristocratic households, complexion could carry political resonance. Marriage alliances were strategic. First impressions mattered. A bride presented to a noble family did not enter the room as a private individual. She entered as representative of lineage. Her face, carefully prepared, signaled health, refinement, and suitability. In such contexts, pallor became more than fashion. It was reassurance. It suggested that the family she came from possessed the means to protect and preserve her. The body bore witness to household stability. Yet outside the court, similar codes operated in quieter ways. In towns where guilds structured labor and hierarchy was visible, but less grand appearance still communicated belonging. A complexion that appeared orderly and well kept suggested self-respect and discipline. It reassured neighbors. In tightly woven communities where reputation traveled quickly, the surface of the face was rarely neutral. It was observed, interpreted, folded into narrative. The medieval understanding of health further complicated this picture. Medical theories of the time were rooted in humoral balance, the interplay of bodily fluids believed to shape temperament and vitality. A complexion might be read as indicator of internal equilibrium. A balanced tone implied harmony within. Discoloration could provoke concern. Thus, attention to the skin was not purely aesthetic. It intersected with prevailing medical logic. Beauty and health intertwined, not because people confused them, but because their worldview linked outer sign and inner state. There is something intimate about this linking. The skin becomes borderland between inside and outside, between soul and society. It is the first surface others encounter. In the medieval imagination, that surface carried suggestion. Clear skin could imply purity. Smoothness could evoke youth. Even lightness itself, in an era saturated with symbolic uses of brightness and shadow, resonated with spiritual undertones. Light signified clarity, revelation, divine presence. To be fair was not automatically to be holy, but the vocabulary overlapped. Still, we must resist the temptation to imagine uniformity. The Middle Ages spanned centuries and regions. Climate differed. Trade routes introduced dyes, fabrics, and ingredients that influenced practice. What was admired in one court might not be emphasized in another. Yet across variations, the association between complexion and status appears again and again. It was not incidental, it was structural. Consider how little privacy existed in medieval daily life. Homes were shared spaces. Work was communal. Public rituals structured time. In such an environment, appearance was rarely hidden. Faces were seen in markets, in church, at gatherings. The pale face stood out. It declared something without words, and because literacy was limited for many visual signals carried particular weight. The body became text, but pallor was not achieved by withdrawal alone. Medieval texts include references to treatments intended to brighten or clarify the complexion. Recipes combined natural ingredients with careful preparation. The goal was not theatrical transformation, it was subtle enhancement. The language often emphasizes removing blemishes, smoothing irregularities, restoring freshness. Even here, moderation remains key. The aim is not spectacle, but refinement. This refinement speaks to a broader medieval sensitivity to surfaces. Cloth was valued not only for warmth, but for texture and color. Manuscripts were illuminated with gold leaf. Church interiors were painted richly. Attention to material appearance was not alien to the era. The care of skin fits within this continuum. It reflects a world attentive to how surfaces mediate meaning. At the same time, the vulnerability of the skin was never forgotten. Medieval people lived close to illness, close to decay, close to the visible reminders that the body was neither permanent nor invulnerable. Disease, aging, weather all left their traces without apology. Faces bore the memory of winter winds, of summer heat, of long seasons of labor. The Black Death and the epidemics that followed did not simply alter population numbers. They altered perception. Communities became acutely aware of how quickly vitality could fade, how abruptly a healthy complexion could be replaced by pallor of a different kind, the pallor of sickness. In such a world, a clear and balanced face could seem almost improbable. It was not merely pleasing, it was reassuring. It suggested that this body, at least for now, had endured. It had resisted infection, survived exposure, maintained equilibrium. Beauty, therefore, could carry undertones of gratitude. To look healthy in an age deeply acquainted with mortality was not trivial. It was a sign of resilience. It was a visible testament that life had for the moment held its ground. Yet even that quiet triumph required discipline. Survival did not grant license for excess. If the complexion appeared too carefully engineered, too conspicuously enhanced admiration could shift into suspicion. The pale face had to seem unforced, as though it arose naturally from fortunate circumstance rather than deliberate manipulation. The ideal was effort, concealed beneath effortlessness, care, hidden within simplicity. Medieval culture valued the signs of privilege, a face shielded from harsh labor skin, preserved from constant exposure, but it resisted overt displays that suggested artifice. The boundary between refinement and vanity was thin. The art lay in appearing untouched by effort, even when effort was present. This paradox is not foreign to us, though we describe it differently. Then as now, beauty was admired most when it seemed innate rather than manufactured. The medieval preference for restraint did not deny the existence of preparation. It required that preparation remain subtle. A pale complexion that appeared entirely natural reassured observers. It implied authenticity within hierarchy, not ambition beyond it. Imagine a noblewoman preparing for a feast. The chamber is quiet except for the faint crackle of torches. Servants move discreetly, adjusting garments, arranging fabric. She stands before a polished mirror, small, imperfect, yet sufficient to catch the glow of flame along her cheek. She studies how the light rests upon her skin. Perhaps she applies a gentle preparation intended to soften texture. Perhaps she relies simply on careful washing and rest. Her aim is not to become someone else. It is to present herself as coherent within expectation, to embody balance, to reflect composure, to align with her rank. When she steps into the hall, candlelight touches her face. Those who look at her do not see cosmetics. They see confirmation. Her pale complexion affirms what they already believe about her position. It stabilizes the room. Now shift your gaze to a market town, to a woman whose days are shaped by work and repetition. Her hands are accustomed to movement. Her hours stretch long beneath open sky. She does not possess the same shelter, the same insulation from exposure. Yet she too may tend her skin within the limits available to her. She washes when she can. She shields her face when possible. She takes pride in cleanliness, in order, in presenting herself with dignity. Her complexion may not mirror that of the noblewoman, but it communicates something equally real. It speaks of effort, of resilience, of participation in communal life. Beauty here does not disappear, it shifts. It is measured against different circumstances. It is read through a different lens. In both cases, the skin becomes narrative. It carries evidence of environment and endurance. It reveals not only aesthetic preference, but lived reality. The noblewoman's pallor suggests distance from hardship. The market woman's complexion suggests proximity to it. Neither exists outside context. Beauty in each setting remains relative, shaped by the conditions that frame it. It is not abstract or universal. It emerges from circumstance, interpreted within the boundaries of expectation. And so, whether beneath torchlight in a great hall or under open sky in a town square, the face remains central. It absorbs weather, reflects health signals belonging. It is vulnerable, resilient, scrutinized. In a world where life could alter swiftly, where disease could erase vitality overnight, the appearance of balance carried quiet significance. Beauty was never immune to fragility. It existed alongside it, illuminated by it, made more precious by the knowledge that it could fade. This relativity reminds us that beauty in the Middle Ages was never detached from reality, never floating above daily life as a decorative abstraction. It was rooted in the texture of existence shaped by climate-labor architecture and the rhythms of survival. Pallor signified privilege, not because people randomly chose to admire light skin, but because their environment invested that trait with meaning. The sun was not symbolic alone, it was physical constant marking those who worked beneath it. The fields were not poetic imagery, they were sites of endurance where bodies bent and darkened through necessity. The architecture of daily life, stone interiors, narrow windows, layered garments, created contrasts between those who labored outdoors and those who remained sheltered within walls. In such a world, preference did not emerge in isolation. It arose from lived difference. What was admired reflected what was rare, and what was rare reflected circumstance. Modern observers sometimes misread this preference as superficial obsession, as though medieval admiration for pallor were no more than vanity detached from substance. But when we look more closely, the logic deepens. In a society structured by visible hierarchy, where distinctions between rank were meant to be recognized immediately, the body itself became part of the architecture of order. Just as clothing signaled status and speech revealed education, complexion communicated place, a pale, balanced face reassured observers because it fit within expectations. It affirmed that the person before them occupied a defined position. It suggested continuity, that inherited roles had not dissolved, that the fragile scaffolding of hierarchy still held firm. In a world vulnerable to famine, disease, and political unrest, such visual confirmation carried quiet comfort. This does not mean individuals moved through this system without personal feeling. Pride could accompany a well-kept appearance. Insecurity could surface when one's features failed to match admired ideals. Longing might arise in those who wished for refinement beyond their circumstances. These emotions were real and deeply human, yet they unfolded within shared assumptions about what appearance signified. Beauty was not framed as rebellion against structure, not as an act of self-definition divorced from community. It was shaped by the expectations that surrounded it. The individual did not invent the meaning of pallor, they inhabited it. As we linger with the image of the pale face, the significance grows more layered. It was never simply about color on the surface of skin. It pointed toward distance from hardship, toward the presence of protection, toward a life less exposed to relentless labor. It aligned with ideals of balance, of moderation, of visible harmony. To be seen as pale in the approved sense was to be read in a particular way. It was to participate in a shared understanding of what refinement looked like. The surface of the skin became a quiet declaration without spoken words. I belong within the sheltered spaces of this world. I am preserved from excess. I exist within order. And beneath that declaration, as always, lay the tension between reality and aspiration. No face remained unchanged by time. No complexion was immune to weather or age. Yet the pursuit of balance persisted. It reflected not vanity alone, but the enduring medieval desire for harmony within the body, within society, within the cosmos itself. There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a room when someone does something deliberate to their own body. Not a violent act, not a desperate one, but a careful adjustment, small, precise, intentional. In the late Middle Ages, that silence might have gathered around a woman seated near a window, her fingers raised to her brow, removing a single strand of hair. Then another, and another. The gesture was neither frantic nor careless. It was controlled. It was aesthetic. It was cultural. To modern eyes, the idea can feel startling. Why would someone deliberately thin their eyebrows? Why would they pluck the hairline back from the forehead, reshaping what nature had given? Yet, in many parts of late medieval Europe, particularly in aristocratic circles, a high, smooth forehead was admired. It appears again and again in portraits and manuscript illuminations, women with elongated brows, their hair drawn back, their foreheads expansive and luminous under soft paint. The absence of hair was not accidental. It was cultivated. To understand this standard, we must return to the medieval fascination with proportion and light. The forehead occupies a prominent space on the human face. It is the surface upon which light rests most easily. When broadened, it reflects brightness, emphasizing clarity and serenity. A high forehead, framed by delicate brows, created an impression of refinement, an open, uninterrupted plane that seemed orderly and calm. The removal of hair enhanced this visual effect. It reduced irregularity, it simplified the surface, it aligned the face with ideals of balance. But this was not merely about geometry. The shaping of eyebrows and hairlines intersected with deeper associations. Hair in medieval symbolism was powerful. It could represent vitality, sensuality, or disorder. Loose hair, especially on women, often carried connotations of intimacy or vulnerability. Covered or controlled hair suggested modesty and discipline. By refining the hairline and thinning the brows, a woman did not eliminate hair entirely. She curated it. She placed it within limits. The result was not wildness, but containment. Containment mattered. Medieval society prized visible signs of self-governance. Just as clothing was structured and layered, just as gestures were moderated, so too was the face adjusted to reflect composure. Excessive hair could appear unruly. A smooth forehead uninterrupted by heavy brows suggested restraint. The face became less crowded, more legible. It projected quiet authority. There is also a subtler dimension to this aesthetic one that moves beneath surface preference and enters the realm of inherited meaning. In theological and philosophical traditions carried into the Middle Ages from antiquity, the head was not merely anatomical, it was hierarchical. It was imagined as the seat of reason, the governing center of the body. The forehead rising above the eyes framed perception itself. It hovered over sight and expression, occupying a position that suggested oversight and contemplation. To emphasize this region by widening it visually, by allowing more space for light to gather, could subtly heighten the impression of composure and intellect. The face appeared less crowded, more ordered, as though the mind within were equally measured. Whether or not individuals consciously articulated this association, the visual language resonated. A high forehead did not need explanation to be understood. It became shorthand for refinement, for a kind of quiet nobility that seemed to extend beyond ornament into disposition. Yet achieving this look required effort. Hair does not retreat simply because taste demands it. It must be removed carefully, deliberately, strand by strand. The process asks for patience, steady hands, and attention to proportion. It is intimate unfolding close to the skin, accompanied by the faint, sharp sensation that reminds the body it is being reshaped. There is something profoundly deliberate in this encounter between body and will. It is not theatrical, but it is decisive. The face does not change dramatically in a single moment. It shifts gradually through repetition and care. Perhaps this is why the practice feels so immediate to us now. It reveals that medieval beauty was not accidental. It required participation. It required time. And yet, as with all medieval ideals, participation unfolded within boundaries. The removal of hair was not intended as radical alteration. The goal was never spectacle. The brow was softened, not erased into blankness. The hairline was lifted, not pulled back beyond familiarity. The effect had to merge seamlessly into the whole so that the observer perceived harmony rather than intervention. If the manipulation became visible, if the hand behind the change announced itself too loudly, it risked disrupting the balance it aimed to preserve. The art lay in subtlety. Adjustment had to dissolve into coherence. Only then could the expanded forehead carry its suggestion of refinement without unsettling the very order it was meant to reflect. Portraits from the 15th century show faces that seem almost elongated upward, the forehead occupying a generous expanse between brow and hair. The eyebrows are faint, sometimes barely visible. To modern viewers accustomed to bold brows and defined arches, the look can seem austere. But within its own context, it communicated delicacy. It suggested that the face had been refined like carved stone shaped towards an ideal of clarity. We might ask whether this standard was universal, whether every corner of medieval Europe embraced the same elevated hairline and softened brow. The answer quietly and firmly is no. As with complexion, aesthetic preferences shifted with geography, climate, artistic influence, and the passage of time. What was favored in one region could appear unfamiliar in another. What gained prominence in one century might recede in the next. Medieval culture was not frozen. It evolved, responded, adapted. Beauty like language moved across landscapes unevenly. And yet within that variation, patterns emerge. The repeated appearance of depilated brows and raised hairlines in late medieval art is not incidental. When we encounter the same visual configuration across multiple manuscripts, portraits, and panels, we begin to recognize more than personal idiosyncrasy. We see acknowledgement, we see admiration. The aesthetic was sufficiently widespread within particular circles to be rendered again and again, preserved deliberately in pigment and gold leaf. Artists did not invent these features in isolation. They reflected a preference that resonated with their patrons and audiences. This recurrence suggests that the practice was recognized and understood within certain social environments. It was not a private eccentricity hidden from view. It was visible convention, subtle perhaps, but legible to those attuned to its meaning. The high forehead and faint brow became part of a shared visual vocabulary, one that signaled refinement and alignment within specific cultural contexts. Even if not universally adopted, it carried enough authority within its sphere to be repeated, recorded, and remembered. Still, the moral gaze did not vanish here either. Altering the body always risked criticism. If cosmetics blurred the line between care and deceit, depilation could provoke similar unease. Was the reshaping of the brow an enhancement of natural harmony or an artificial distortion? Did it affirm refinement or suggest dissatisfaction with God's design? Such questions, though rarely recorded in direct dialogue, hovered in the cultural atmosphere. The act of removing hair from the forehead also altered the balance between concealment and exposure. Hair often functions as frame and veil. When drawn back, it reveals more of the face. In a society where modesty was valued, the exposure of the forehead paradoxically intensified composure rather than sensuality. It shifted attention upward, away from mouth and cheeks, toward the plane associated with reason. Beauty here was intellectualized. It was not fiery, it was serene. Imagine again a chamber lit by afternoon light filtering through narrow windows. A young woman sits with careful posture. Before her, a small mirror rests on a table. She studies her reflection, not with vanity, but with concentration. Her fingers move along her brow. A strand disappears, then another. The room is quiet except for her breath. There is no audience. The performance will occur later in public. This moment is preparation, an alignment of surface with expectation. When she later enters the hall, the transformation is subtle enough to pass without comment. No one pauses to note the absence of a few fine hairs. No whisper rises to mark the adjustment. What they register instead is an atmosphere, an overall impression that settles gently over her features. Refinement, balance, serenity. The face appears composed, uninterrupted, coherent. The alteration has disappeared into the whole, absorbed so completely that it feels less like change and more like completion. That is the art of it. Not to be seen altering, but to be seen as harmonious. But if we widen the frame beyond the torchlit hall and the polished floors of courtly space, the picture becomes more varied. Not every woman participated in this practice. In rural settings, daily routine followed different demands. Labor required early rising, constant movement, attention to animals, fields, and seasons. Practicality shaped time. The careful removal of brow hair may have seemed unnecessary, even indulgent within such rhythms. Grooming was present, but proportioned to circumstance. Beauty standards in agrarian life answered to different measures of resilience, cleanliness, capability. The aesthetic of the court did not simply duplicate itself in the village. It traveled unevenly, altered by distance, filtered through necessity, sometimes adopted in softened form, sometimes ignored entirely. This variation reminds us that medieval beauty was never monolithic. The high forehead did not float above society as a universal command. It emerged within specific social contexts, courtly environments, urban centers influenced by artistic convention circles, attentive to symbolic nuance. It reflected taste shaped by proximity to power, by exposure to visual culture, by participation in shared ideals. It did not invalidate other forms of attractiveness. It existed alongside them. Yet because art so often preserves the elite more faithfully than the common, our visual memory of the era is disproportionately filled with these elongated, pale, luminous faces. They linger in manuscripts and panels, becoming shorthand for an entire century. Within this dynamic, there is also aspiration. To refine the brow was not only to follow fashion, it was to align oneself with courtly culture. It signaled literacy in a visual language understood by those who moved within privileged circles. Participation in such grooming practices became a subtle declaration of affiliation. Just as clothing could echo noble fashion in moderated ways, borrowing a silhouette, fastening a detail, so too could grooming gestures reflect aristocratic preference. Beauty functioned here as connection. It allowed the individual to situate themselves within a recognizable aesthetic community, and yet, as ever, moderation governed the boundary. Alteration that pushed too far risked disruption. The medieval ideal favored balance over spectacle. Depilation was not intended as dramatic transformation. It was calibrated adjustment. The brow was thinned, not erased into stark absence. The hairline shifted, not drawn back beyond plausibility. Each change aimed at harmony, not exaggeration. If the effort became too visible, it undermined itself. The art required restraint. The fascination with the forehead also intersects with a broader medieval attentiveness to surfaces touched by light. Just as pale skin gathered brightness and returned it softly, so too, did a broad, smooth forehead serve as a receptive plane for illumination. The visual field of the face expanded upward, allowing candlelight to rest there, allowing daylight to linger. In art, this effect translated into a calm radiance that seemed almost spiritual in tone. In life, it translated into composed presence, a face that caught light without distraction, that reflected clarity without ostentation. The forehead became less a void left by removed hair, and more a surface prepared for illumination, integrated into a wider aesthetic that prized harmony between form and glow. One might wonder whether discomfort accompanied such practices. Certainly, the removal of hair is not painless. There is a brief sting, a tightening of the skin, a small insistence of the body reminding the mind that something has been altered. And yet medieval culture was not unfamiliar with discomfort undertaken for purpose. Fasting shaped appetite into obedience. Pilgrimage tested endurance across miles of uncertain terrain. Labor demanded repetition long after fatigue set in. Within such a framework, the careful shaping of a brow may not have registered as extraordinary. It was another measured act of discipline, another instance in which the body was guided rather than indulged. What mattered was not the momentary sensation, but the result, the restoration of proportion, the alignment of appearance with expectation. The transient sting faded. The visible harmony remained. And so the high forehead, the faint brow, the carefully managed hairline became part of the vocabulary of late medieval beauty, a language spoken softly but understood widely within its circle. To modern eyes, the look may seem severe, almost austere in its restraint. But to those who lived within that aesthetic world, it communicated refinement. It signaled that the individual had attended to detail without succumbing to extravagance. It affirmed belonging within a particular visual order, one that valued clarity over ornament, restraint over exuberance. In its subtlety, it reflected the enduring medieval desire to smooth irregularity into coherence, to bring the body into quiet dialogue with ideals of balance. Beauty here did not shout for attention. It did not rely on bold pigment or dramatic contour to announce itself. Instead, it operated through subtraction. By removing it revealed. By simplifying it clarified. The face relieved of excess appeared more open, more legible. The broad forehead caught light without obstruction. The softened brow drew no sharp line of interruption. The overall impression was not of transformation, but of refinement, as though the face had been gently edited toward serenity. As candlelight settles once more across our imagined hall, the faces that emerge from shadow share this quality of quiet control. The glow flickers across smooth foreheads and delicate brows, across expressions that remain composed even in the shifting light. There is no effort to astonish, no attempt to dazzle through spectacle. Instead, there is harmony. Each feature seems placed with intention, neither exaggerated nor neglected. The effect is cumulative and calm and aesthetic that rests on equilibrium rather than display. In this way, the shaping of eyebrows and hairlines reveals something fundamental about medieval beauty. It was never an invitation to excess. It was an exercise in adjustment within bounds, a subtle negotiation between natural form and cultural expectation. Crafting such an appearance required awareness of rank, of modesty, of proportion. Even something as small as a single hair carried interpretive weight. Even the narrow space between brow and crown became a surface through which belonging could be expressed. The smallest alteration participated in a larger pattern. And if we listen closely beneath the faint rustle of layered fabric, and the soft crackle of flame against stone, we hear again that quiet medieval refrain, beauty must align. It must fit within the pattern already given. It must seem natural, even when it has been shaped by deliberate hands. The forehead gleams softly in the dim light, not as spectacle-seeking admiration, but as sign of discipline carefully maintained, of refinement, patiently cultivated, of belonging secured within an order that extends far beyond the solitary individual. There is a persistent image that clings to the Middle Ages like smoke that refuses to clear. It is the image of grime, of tangled hair, of bodies untouched by water, of streets thick with odor. It lingers in films, in casual conversation, in the shorthand of jokes. The medieval world, we are told, did not care about cleanliness. It endured filth as an unavoidable companion. And yet, when we lean closer to the evidence, when we listen not to caricature, but to record the air shifts, beneath the noise of myth, we find something quieter and more deliberate, a culture attentive to hair, to scent, to washing, to the management of the body's presence in shared space. Hair in particular occupied an ambiguous place in medieval thought. It was both ornament and warning. Thick, shining hair could be admired as a sign of youth and vitality. At the same time, hair left loose and uncontrolled could suggest disorder or immodesty. Medieval art frequently shows women with hair carefully arranged, braided, bound, veiled, or covered. The act of arranging hair was not incidental. It was daily practice. It required tools, time, and intention. Combs appear in archaeological finds and in manuscript illustrations, not as luxury novelties, but as familiar objects. The repetitive gesture of drawing a comb through strands speaks to attention to care, to the desire for smoothness. The management of hair intersected with modesty. In many regions, married women covered their hair in public not because hair was despised, but because it carried symbolic charge. To conceal it was to signal status and propriety. Beneath the veil, however, hair did not vanish. It was washed, brushed, sometimes scented. Care did not cease when it became less visible. If anything, concealment increased the importance of maintenance. Hidden hair still belonged to the self. It still reflected order or neglect. And here the myth of indifference begins to unravel. Medieval texts include references to preparations intended to clean and condition hair. Recipes recorded in medical and cosmetic compilations describe mixtures of herbs and other ingredients meant to clarify the scalp or soften texture. These instructions are practical, not poetic. They assume that readers wish to manage their hair's appearance. They do not apologize for this desire. Instead, they treat it as part of bodily stewardship. Scent, too, occupied a meaningful space in medieval life. The medieval town was not odorless. No pre-modern city was. But the presence of strong smells did not eliminate the desire for fragrance. On the contrary, it intensified it. Aromatic substances, herbs, flowers, resins were valued for their capacity to refresh air and body alike. Manuscripts contain instructions for creating preparations that sweetened breath or perfumed hair. The very act of recording such recipes signals awareness of scent as social currency. Breath carried proximity. Hair carried trace. In a society structured around close communal life, shared halls, crowded markets, clustered homes, odor was not abstract. It was immediate. It is easy to assume that without modern plumbing, bathing was rare or non-existent. The truth is more layered. Urban centers in parts of medieval Europe included bathhouses, spaces where washing occurred communally. These establishments varied in character and reputation across time and region, but their presence complicates the narrative of neglect. Bathing was not universally rejected. It was practiced within particular contexts. Water heated and shared became site of both hygiene and sociability. To wash was not solely about removing dirt. It was about participating in communal rhythm. The bathhouse occupies a curious place in medieval imagination. It could be associated with relaxation, even pleasure, but also with moral suspicion. As with cosmetics, the moral gaze hovered. Too much indulgence in bodily comfort risked criticism. Yet the existence of these spaces demonstrates that washing was recognized as beneficial. The medieval body was not abandoned to filth. It was managed within available infrastructure. Imagine entering such a bathhouse. Steam rises, blurring edges. The sound of water echoes softly against stone. Bodies move with care. Conversations murmur. Towels hang near walls. The atmosphere is not frantic, but ritualized. Washing here is not frantic scrubbing. It is measured. Hair is loosened and cleansed. Skin is rinsed. The body is restored to balance. Outside, the street may carry smells of animals and refuse, but inside the air shifts toward warmth and moisture. Even beyond formal bathhouses, washing occurred in domestic settings. Basins, pitchers, cloths, these objects appear in inventories and illustrations. Water was drawn heated when possible, applied with intention. Complete immersion may not have been daily practice for all, but partial washing was routine. Faces were cleaned. Hands were rinsed. Hair was attended to. Cleanliness existed within limits defined by labor and resource, but it was not absent. The myth of medieval dirt persists, partly because modern observers measure the past against contemporary infrastructure and assume absence where systems differ. Without modern sanitation networks, without plumbing, concealed within walls and streets designed for rapid waste removal conditions, could indeed become unsanitary, particularly during moments of crisis. Crowded towns' seasonal heat and epidemic strain could intensify discomfort. Yet to move from structural limitation to presumed indifference is to collapse complexity into caricature. The lack of modern engineering does not imply the absence of awareness. Medieval people lived within their material realities, but they were not oblivious to them. They understood the sharp intrusion of unpleasant odor, the way scent could cling to fabric or linger in confined space. They recognized how quickly smell altered perception, how it influenced social interaction. Discomfort was not theoretical, it was experienced, and within the boundaries available to them, they sought to respond. Perfume, therefore, cannot be dismissed as mere ornament or indulgence. It served a practical and atmospheric function. In enclosed spaces, churches heavy with incense, smoke halls crowded with bodies, chambers sealed against cold fragrance shifted the quality of air. It did not erase reality, but it tempered it. Applied to hair, woven into clothing, touched lightly to skin scent, traveled quietly ahead of its bearer. It softened the transition between spaces between individuals. It lingered without spectacle, altering atmosphere in ways that were felt rather than seen. The person who carried a gentle fragrance entered a room differently than one who did not. The difference was not dramatic, it was subtle. Yet subtlety shaped experience. A pleasant scent suggested care, intention, and awareness of others. It recalibrated proximity. In a world structured by closeness, shared tables, narrow streets, collective worship, the understated presence of fragrance carried quiet significance, influencing perception without announcing itself. There is something intimate about fragrance. It cannot be seen, only experienced. It travels invisibly, bridging distance. In the Middle Ages, when social hierarchy governed proximity, scent became another layer of presentation. To smell clean or pleasantly perfumed suggested care, access, and awareness of others. It communicated respect for shared space. Hair once again sits at the intersection of visibility and invisibility. It frames the face-absorbed scent, responds to washing. To comb and perfume hair was to manage not only appearance, but presence. A veil might conceal it from sight, but not entirely from experience. The medieval individual navigated these subtleties with more consciousness than we often grant. Yet, as always, moderation tempered indulgence. Medieval culture rarely embraced extremes without caution, and the realm of scent and bathing was no exception. Excessive perfume applied too heavily or too frequently could shift admiration into suspicion. Fragrance was meant to suggest refinement, not to overwhelm the senses or declare vanity. Likewise, bathing, though practiced and valued, was not pursued without awareness of perception. In certain contexts, washing too often, or with too much visible pleasure, could invite quiet criticism interpreted as excessive concern with the body. The medieval approach was not one of abandon nor one of neglect, but of calibration. Cleanliness was acknowledged as beneficial, even desirable, yet it was expected to remain within the boundaries of humility. Care had to appear measured, integrated into daily life, rather than elevated above it. It is also important to remember that medieval attitudes toward bathing and scent did not remain static. They shifted subtly across centuries, responding to circumstance rather than following a single unbroken rule. Periods marked by epidemic, heightened anxieties about the body and its vulnerability. Medical theories influenced how people understood the effects of water, air, and proximity. Climate-altered habits, cold winters, and limited fuel shaped how often water could be heated. Resource availability influenced practice, just as urban density shaped custom differently than rural isolation. There was no single medieval doctrine governing cleanliness. Instead, there were patterns flexible, adaptive, shaped by environment and belief. The familiar caricature of the unwashed medieval peasant flattens this complexity. It replaces nuance with exaggeration. It ignores the lived reality of people whose daily existence unfolded close to the natural world. Medieval individuals knew intimately the sensation of sweat drying on skin after labor, the fine dust of harvest settling into hair, the sting of winter wind against the face. These were not abstract inconveniences. They were physical experiences woven into routine. And they responded not with indifference, but with the means available to them. Water drawn from wells, herbs gathered or traded, cloth used for wiping and drying, combs passed through hair. These tools formed part of the ordinary rhythm of care. Consider again a woman preparing for a gathering. As daylight fades, she loosens her hair, allowing it to fall before drawing a comb steadily through it, untangling the strands accumulated through hours of work. She bends over a basin and washes her face with water that cools her skin. If she adds fragrance, it is light, barely perceptible, an accent rather than a statement. The gestures unfold without ceremony. They are neither defensive nor dramatic. They do not proclaim rebellion against filth, nor do they seek attention. They are expressions of order, small acts that restore balance before entering shared space. Within these quiet movements, the medieval body reveals not neglect, but deliberation, care shaped by circumstance, measured by restraint, and guided by a desire to appear aligned within the expectations of the world it inhabits. Or imagine a man returning from labor at the edge of dusk, the last light still clinging to his shoulders as he pauses near the doorway. Before he steps into communal space, he bends over a basin, letting cool water run across his hands. The gesture is unremarkable in scale, almost instinctive, yet it carries quiet weight. Dust loosens, sweat thins, the marks of the field soften. What takes place in that brief rinsing is not merely physical cleansing, it is transition. He moves from one sphere into another, from toil into fellowship, from the open field into the enclosed hall. Cleanliness becomes a threshold, a small ritual of crossing. The water does not erase his labor, but it frames it. It signals readiness to re-enter shared life with composure. These gestures, humble and repetitive, complicate the familiar myth. They do not support the image of indifference. They reveal attentiveness woven into routine. Medieval life, though constrained by the limits of infrastructure and environment, was not devoid of care. It was shaped by available means, by practical rhythms, by resourcefulness. The body was not abandoned to chance. It was tended within the boundaries imposed by season and circumstance. Washing did not require abundance to exist. It required intention. And yet, as with complexion and hairline, the care of hair and scent never remained purely practical. It carried symbolic undertones that deepened its meaning. Cleanliness aligned easily with virtue. A person who appeared orderly suggested discipline not only of body, but of spirit. Composure at the surface hinted at composure within. Conversely, visible neglect could invite interpretation. It might be read as carelessness, as moral laxity, as disregard for communal expectation. In a society where cohesion depended upon shared codes, appearance reinforced those codes. To present oneself as clean was to affirm belonging. The medieval concern with scent extended this symbolism into subtler territory. Fragrance was not merely pleasant, it was resonant. In sacred spaces, incense rose in visible clouds, transforming air into atmosphere. The scent marked separation between ordinary and holy, between profane and consecrated. Descriptions of paradise often included the sweetness of flowers, the absence of decay. Odor carried association. It suggested purity, sanctity, transcendence. Within such a framework, to cultivate fragrance in daily life was not entirely secular. It echoed larger meanings. The body gently perfumed participated in a vocabulary that linked scent to reverence. Still, moderation prevailed. Fragrance had to remain restrained, a quiet presence rather than an announcement. Cleanliness, too, required balance. Excessive preoccupation risked pride. Too much attention to bodily comfort could draw moral scrutiny. The medieval world moved along this narrow line between care and humility, between maintenance and vanity. It was a balancing act performed daily, often without drama, but never without awareness. As the evening deepens in our imagined town, these small acts gather softly into the rhythm of night. Hair is braided and bound or drawn beneath cloth. Faces are washed with water poured from pitchers. Garments are adjusted, smoothed, settled into place. Steam thins and vanishes from bathhouse stones as the last patrons depart. The air carries faint traces of herbs, subtle, not overpowering. The caricature of filth dissolves in this quieter light. In its place stands a society, neither obsessed with dirt nor consumed by display, but engaged in ongoing negotiation with environment belief and expectation. Hair perfume and washing were not trivial luxuries scattered on the margins of life. They were components of identity woven into the daily choreography of movement between spaces. They shaped how one entered a room, how one approached a neighbor, how one stood among others. They influenced how a person was read without speech, without proclamation. And so the myth of medieval dirt fades not into romantic exaggeration, but into nuance. The Middle Ages were inhabited by bodies keenly aware of themselves, bodies that labored and perspired, that rinsed and refreshed, that combed and scented. Bodies that accepted constraint without surrendering care. Bodies that understood the language of presence. In the flicker of torchlight, as hair settles against cloth, and the faint aroma of herbs lingers in the air, we hear again that steady refrain, beauty must align. Cleanliness must fit within humility. Scent must suggest rather than declare. The body becomes sign, once more, not of neglect, but of deliberate participation in a world where even the invisible carried meaning, where the smallest gesture could echo within the larger pattern of shared life. Before a word is spoken, before a face is fully studied, before even scent reaches the aircloth, speaks, it moves first. It rustles, it falls, it catches light. In the Middle Ages, clothing was not a passive covering, but an instrument, structured, layered, deliberate. If skin carried biography and hair-framed restraint garments completed the sentence. They shaped the body's outline, corrected its irregularities, amplified its signals. Clothing was not merely decoration, it was technology. To call it technology may seem anachronistic, yet the term fits. Medieval garments were engineered for effect. Seams followed lines that elongated or narrowed the silhouette. Sleeves could widen dramatically, drawing attention outward, or taper closely, emphasizing delicacy. Bodices structured posture, encouraging upright composure. Layers controlled temperature, but also controlled shape. Each piece interacted with the body, adjusting how it appeared in motion and at rest. The medieval world was intensely aware of hierarchy, not as an abstract theory, but as a visible, daily reality. Power did not need to introduce itself. It entered a room already announced. One did not need to inquire who held authority when fabric could reveal it at a glance. Texture, drape, and density carried information before a word was spoken. Fine wool fell differently from coarse weave. Silk caught light with a quiet sheen that rough cloth could not imitate. Fur lining softened edges and suggested insulation, not only from cold, but from hardship itself. These materials were costly, sometimes regulated, and never neutral. Their presence signaled access to trade, to wealth, to privilege. The body wrapped in such fabric appeared distinct even before posture or expression confirmed it. A gown cut from heavy, richly dyed cloth did not simply cover the wearer. It transformed how light moved across them. It absorbed and reflected illumination in ways that coarse homespun could not. It carried weight, both literal in its folds and symbolic in its message. To wear such cloth was to inhabit status physically. Color itself spoke fluently within this language of hierarchy. Deep blues, vivid reds, luminous greens did not emerge easily from field or hearth. They required dyes that demanded resources, labor, and connection to networks that stretched beyond immediate locality. To wear such hues was to declare participation in systems larger than the village boundary. It was to embody commerce, exchange, and reach. The brilliance of the color hinted at invisible roots of trade and acquisition. By contrast, pale or undyed cloth suggested different realities. Practicality shaped by available means, constraint governed by necessity, simplicity aligned with circumstance. Neither palette was random. Each was legible. The medieval eye read these distinctions instinctively. The colors moving through hallways and marketplaces formed a coded spectrum, one that communicated rank access and alignment within the larger structure of society. And yet clothing did more than announce wealth. It disciplined the body. Layers restricted sudden movement. Long skirts altered stride. Heavy fabric slowed gesture. The resulting composure was not accidental. It was shaped. To move gracefully within such garments required awareness. The body learned to inhabit its clothing, to align gesture with fabric. Beauty emerged not only from the garment itself, but from the harmony between wearer and structure. In this sense, clothing functioned as extension of the social order. Just as hair was controlled and skin moderated fabric-framed behavior, the ideal medieval figure was neither slouched nor hurried. The garments discouraged it. A well-cut gown encouraged verticality. A belt defined waist and posture. Cloaks added gravity to movement. The body became architectural, but this architecture was not entirely free. Throughout much of medieval Europe, sumptuary laws attempted to regulate who could wear what. These laws were not trivial details. They reveal how deeply appearance mattered. If clothing were irrelevant, it would not require legislation. Authorities sought to prevent individuals from dressing above their station. Certain fabrics, colors, or embellishments were restricted to particular ranks. The goal was not only economic control, it was visual stability. Society depended upon immediate legibility. When boundaries blurred too visibly, anxiety followed. Imagine walking into a crowded marketplace where the familiar signals of rank have blurred. Figures move past one another in similar cuts of fabric, in colors once reserved for certain households, in silhouettes that no longer separate merchant from minor noble at a glance. For a moment, recognition falters. The eye hesitates. If a merchant dresses indistinguishably from a lesser aristocrat, uncertainty begins to ripple through the space. Authority depends upon visibility. When hierarchy cannot be read quickly, it feels unstable. In a society structured around clear gradations of power and responsibility, such visual ambiguity unsettled the underlying order. The medieval instinct toward coherence responded not by abandoning beauty, but by codifying it. Attire was shaped into law. What could be worn by whom and in what context became subject to regulation. Clothing ceased to be merely personal expression. It became civic matter. Beauty was regulated because it was legible. It signified belonging, and belonging required boundaries. Yet regulation did not extinguish desire. Human aspiration rarely vanishes in the presence of rule. It adapts. Even within prescribed limits, individuals found subtle ways to align themselves with prevailing aesthetics. A seam could be cut with greater precision. A sleeve might fall in a slightly more fashionable line. An embellishment, modest yet deliberate, could introduce refinement without crossing into prohibition. These adjustments were carefully measured. They did not challenge the law directly. They navigated around its edges. In this quiet space between restriction and imitation, creativity persisted. Just as the brow might be softened rather than erased, so too could a garment be refined without violating statute. The silhouette remained appropriate, yet it echoed higher styles. The color stayed within permitted range, yet its shade leaned toward richness. Beauty here did not break structure. It moved within it. The art lay in calibration, knowing how far to go without going too far, how to participate without appearing to overreach. In this balance, medieval clothing revealed once again that beauty was less about excess than about alignment, less about defiance than about measured belonging. there is a particular intimacy in dressing that we sometimes forget. The medieval individual did not simply step into mass-produced garments. Clothing was constructed fitted mended. It bore the marks of hands that stitched and altered. The relationship between wearer and garment was ongoing. Fabric aged. It was patched. It carried memory. Beauty, therefore, was not static. It evolved with use. For women of the court, clothing could create striking silhouettes. Fitted bodices emphasized narrow waists. Flowing skirts extended downward in generous folds. Sleeves trailed or opened to reveal layers beneath. Each element contributed to a vertical emphasis that aligned with earlier aesthetic preferences for elongation and balance. The body appeared structured, almost sculpted. For men, too, garments shaped identity in ways that were both visible and deliberate. The medieval male figure did not emerge from fabric accidentally. It was constructed through it. Doublets, hose, cloaks, each piece contributed to a controlled outline. A well-fitted doublet gathered the torso into clarity, drawing attention to shoulders and chest, suggesting steadiness and contained strength. Hose traced the line of the leg closely following its natural form without concealment. The body was not obscured beneath loose drapery. It was articulated. Proportion became readable. Just as women's attire emphasized vertical harmony and measured grace, men's garments aimed at composure and structure. The intention was not exaggeration, not theatrical distortion of form, but balance. The silhouette communicated self-possession, neither slack nor overly adorned. Texture carried equal authority. Velvet and linen did not merely differ in appearance. They altered the way light rested upon the wearer. Velvet absorbed glow, deepening color into richness. Linen reflected light more plainly, revealing simplicity in its weave. Fur lining visible at collar or cuff suggested insulation not only from cold, but from hardship itself. It implied protection secured through means unavailable to all. The sensory dimension of clothing, its weight across the shoulders, its softness against the skin, reinforce these distinctions in ways both subtle and constant. Garments were experienced from within as much as observed from without. To wear heavy layered garments in winter while others endured thinner cloth was not a trivial difference. It was visible privilege. It marked insulation from the elements and by extension from certain forms of vulnerability. In a climate where cold could be severe and fuel-limited warmth was not universal, the layered figure moved through winter with assurance, while others adjusted their steps against chill. Clothing in this sense did more than frame the body. It mediated experience. And through that mediation, it communicated rank resource and belonging without a word being spoken. And yet the moral gaze lingered here as well. Excessive adornment risked criticism. Too much embroidery, too conspicuous a display of color could provoke comment. Beauty had to align with humility. The garment must enhance without overwhelming. The medieval aesthetic favored coherence. A noblewoman did not seek to astonish. She sought to embody her rank without disrupting it. In illuminated manuscripts, figures are rendered with deliberate attention to drapery, as though the artist understood that fabric carries meaning equal to flesh. The folds descend in measured rhythm, neither chaotic nor accidental. They echo architectural lines arched vertical, balanced. The movement of cloth guides the eye upward, reinforcing the composure of the body beneath. Symmetry appears not only in facial arrangement, but in the fall of garments, in the way sleeves mirror one another, in the balanced distribution of color. Clothing becomes visual architecture, framing the body within the larger composition of the page. It structures the figure just as columns structure a nave. It is no accident that garments receive such care in depiction. They are not decorative afterthoughts. They are integral to the message being conveyed. Yet beyond the courtly scene and the gilded manuscript, clothing tells other stories. In villages and market towns, garments were simpler in material and cut yet no less significant. A clean apron tied securely at the waist signaled attentiveness. A well-maintained tunic, though worn, spoke of continuity and care. Patches did not automatically imply neglect. They testified to preservation to fabric extended beyond its first life. Cloth endured, and its endurance mirrored the endurance of those who wore it. Beauty here did not rest upon luxury or vivid dye. It rested upon order. It resided in neatness, in alignment, in the quiet dignity of garments kept intact. The medieval individual understood instinctively that clothing mediated perception. To appear in soiled or torn garments in a setting that demanded composure risked misreading. Context mattered. A cloak stained from travel might be expected on the road, but inappropriate in the hall. Just as scent altered atmosphere and complexion hinted at status cloth-framed identity with immediacy. It was the outermost layer of the social self the first surface offered to communal interpretation. Through it, a person declared readiness, position, intention. Consider again a gathering in a great hall illuminated by torches. Figures cross the threshold one by one. Before faces are fully discerned in flickering light color and cut make their announcement. A deep blue gown absorbs and releases the flame's glow, signaling resource and reach. A fur-trimmed cloak suggests insulation secured against the cold month's protection afforded by means. A modest yet carefully kept tunic conveys reliability, steadiness, participation in shared labor. Each garment speaks through texture and hue, communicating long before conversation begins. Clothing interacts with light in deliberate ways. Metallic threads catch illumination and scatter it softly. Pale fabrics reflect glow, appearing almost luminous against darker surroundings. Dark cloth absorbs brightness, creating depth and contrast. The interplay of illumination across layered textiles reinforces the medieval fascination with radiance and order. Garments become surfaces upon which light performs, much as it does upon skin or the broadened forehead. The body stands within a choreography of glow and shadow framed by fabric that both shapes and reflects it. There is something ceremonial in the act of dressing within such a world. The process unfolds in sequence linen laid closest to the skin, then more structured layers, then outer garments that complete the silhouette. Each addition alters, proportion refines outline. Each fastening button, tie clasp, draws the body closer to its intended presentation. Dressing is not rushed, it is formative. The individual does not simply put on clothing. They assemble themselves into coherence. By the final layer, posture has shifted movement, has slowed, composure has settled. The person who steps into public space is the result of gradual alignment, and yet despite its structure, medieval clothing remains subject to environment. Rain could penetrate weave and weight fabric heavily against the body. Mud clung to hems during travel. Wind lifted cloaks, tugged at sleeves, unsettled arrangement. The garment could shape the body, but it could not shield it entirely from exposure. Beauty did not erase vulnerability. It managed it. Cloth mediated climate without conquering it. Thus, clothing stands at the intersection of aspiration and reality. It elevates the body, frames it within expectation, translates hierarchy into visible form. At the same time, it reveals limitation laws that restrict excess materials, that carry cost weather, that intrudes upon order. Beauty here is not illusion crafted to deny circumstance. It is negotiation with circumstance. It seeks coherence without denying constraint. In the end, clothing as beauty technology reveals something essential about the medieval imagination. It was not chaotic, not careless, not guided by whim. It was deliberate in construction, structured in intention, and responsive to the realities of environment and belief. Garments were designed with awareness of climate, of cost, of law, of theology, of social expectation. They were not accidental wrappings, but calibrated instruments. Through cut and layering, through color and texture, clothing shaped bodies into forms that could be read at a glance. The silhouette became a language. Invisible hierarchies rank privilege, access, responsibility were translated into visible outline. One did not need proclamation. Proportion sufficed. A sleeve, a hemline, a collar height, the density of fur at the edge of a cloak, each contributed to the quiet articulation of status. Movement itself was guided by fabric. Heavy folds slowed gesture. Structured bodices encouraged upright bearing. Long cloaks lent gravity to stride. Clothing disciplined motion into composure, turning the body into a measured presence rather than an uncontained impulse. As evening deepens and figures settle into place within our imagined hall, this discipline becomes almost palpable. Fabric rests against skin with quiet authority, neither oppressive nor careless, but firm in its shaping. Folds have been arranged with intention. Layers align not by accident, but by practiced hand. The light from torches and candles glides across surfaces, catching metallic thread, softening velvet, lingering briefly upon pale cloth before retreating into shadow. The room does not blaze with spectacle. Instead, it glows with measured color and restrained shimmer. No garment strains to dominate the space. None breaks the rhythm with extravagance. Each piece contributes to the larger visual order, participating in a collective harmony where rank is visible, yet contained beauty, present, yet moderated. The effect is cumulative rather than dramatic. It is coherence achieved through restraint structure, sustained through shared understanding, and in that shared order, fabric becomes more than material. It becomes the visible architecture of belonging. And if we listen closely beneath the whisper of cloth and the subdued murmur of voices, we hear once more that familiar refrain, beauty must align. It must fit within order. It must communicate clearly without fracturing the balance between rank and humility. The garment, like the face and the scent that lingers faintly in the air, becomes a sign not of vanity, but of belonging within a patterned world where appearance speaks with disciplined clarity. There is a temptation, when looking back at the Middle Ages, to imagine that beauty rested upon a single fixed shape, as though every generation shared one unwavering ideal. But the medieval body was never so simple. It shifted in meaning as circumstances shifted. It was read through hunger and abundance, through labor and leisure, through theology and survival. If clothing shaped silhouette and complexion signaled privilege, the body beneath remained the quiet foundation upon which all other signs rested. It was measured, interpreted, and sometimes misunderstood. The medieval world did not inherit a uniform preference for thinness or fullness. Instead, it carried a layered awareness of proportion. Moderation once again guided perception. A body too thin might evoke fragility or illness. A body too heavy might suggest excess or imbalance. The admired form lay somewhere between these extremes where vitality appeared, contained rather than unruly. It was less about dramatic curvature or stark leanness and more about coherence. The body should neither spill beyond its garments nor seem diminished within them. It should align with its clothing, its rank, its rhythm of life. Yet the meaning of flesh was never detached from material reality. In agrarian societies, where famine was not a distant memory, but a recurring threat, visible nourishment could signify security. A figure that appeared sustained, neither gaunt nor weakened, could suggest stability within the household. At the same time, aristocratic refinement often favored a narrower presentation, particularly when clothing emphasized verticality and structure. A slender waist beneath a fitted bodice reinforced elegance. The body became a canvas upon which status and circumstance were quietly inscribed. In illuminated manuscripts and sculptures, one sometimes encounters figures whose forms seem elongated rather than robust. The line is emphasized more than volume. Drapery flows downward in rhythm with the body's axis. This visual language privileges proportion over mass. It is not a rejection of physical presence, but a stylization of it. The body becomes graceful through alignment rather than abundance. Yet even here, fullness is not condemned outright. It appears differently depending on context. Maternal imagery, for instance, may suggest fertility through softness rather than strict linearity. Fertility carried profound weight in medieval life, not as an abstract ideal, but as a practical necessity. The survival of families, the continuation of lineage, and the orderly transfer of inheritance all depended upon it. Within this framework, the female body assumed particular significance. It was not observed only for grace or proportion, but for what it implied about continuity. Signs associated with reproductive capacity could subtly shape how beauty was perceived. A certain softness might be interpreted as readiness for motherhood. A balanced figure could suggest health and viability, the ability to sustain both self and child. These readings were rarely articulated directly, yet they informed perception. Beauty in this context was entwined with the future, yet this interpretation existed alongside enduring ideals of modesty and restraint. Fertility was essential, but it was not to be displayed as spectacle. The body was expected to communicate capability without overt emphasis. Softness could be present, but it remained contained within structured garments. The figure suggested promise without announcing it. As with other aspects of medieval aesthetics, balance prevailed. The female body had to signal potential while maintaining composure. It was valued not for dramatic display, but for quiet alignment with expectation. For men, bodily form intersected with different, yet equally structured expectations. Strength was admired, but again within boundaries. A body too slight might evoke vulnerability or insufficient vigor. Too broad, and it risked appearing coarse, uncontrolled, or excessive. The admired form suggested capability governed by discipline. Clothing reinforced this interpretation. Doublets shaped the torso into clarity, broadening shoulders without exaggeration. Hose traced the legs with precision, revealing form while maintaining decorum. The resulting silhouette emphasized readiness without aggression. The male body appeared prepared, contained within its outline, aligned with purpose rather than impulse. It reflected composure as much as strength, embodying a balance between force and restraint that mirrored the broader medieval insistence on order. The medieval understanding of health reinforced these aesthetic interpretations in ways that were systematic rather than incidental. Within the humoral framework, The body was thought to be governed by the balance of fluids that shaped temperament and condition. Harmony within those internal elements was believed to manifest outwardly. A body that appeared proportionate suggested equilibrium. One that veered toward visible extremes hinted at disturbance. Extreme thinness or pronounced corpulence could be read not only as physical states, but as signs of imbalance within. In this way, aesthetic judgment did not stand apart from medical reasoning. The two were interwoven. Beauty was not evaluated solely by sight. It was interpreted as an index of inner condition. To appear balanced was to imply internal order. Proportion became a visible reassurance that unseen processes remained aligned. And yet, before it became symbol or diagnostic surface, the medieval body was lived reality. It labored in fields and workshops. It endured cold seasons and periods of scarcity. It carried children recovered from illness or failed to recover at all. Flesh bore the marks of weather and work. The ideal body celebrated in art or praised in verse did not deny these experiences. It distilled them. It abstracted from the harshness of daily life a vision of coherence. What appeared in illuminated manuscripts or courtly description was not ignorance of vulnerability, but a response to it, a representation of order rising above fragility. In times of epidemic, when illness could alter the body swiftly and unpredictably, the sight of a figure that appeared whole and proportionate may have carried particular resonance. To encounter someone whose form suggested health was to encounter reassurance. Balance became more than aesthetic preference. It became comfort. Health and beauty overlapped in perception, reinforcing one another in a world acutely aware of mortality. We must also remember that medieval beauty unfolded within layers of clothing. The body was rarely fully visible in public space. Silhouette mattered more than exposure. Shape was inferred through fabric. A narrow waist suggested proportion. A smooth fall of cloth implied harmony beneath. The body did not need to be displayed to be evaluated. Its presence was sensed through structure. Consider a noblewoman standing near a tall window where pale daylight filters through narrow panes. Her gown descends in measured folds, each line falling with intention rather than accident. The bodice narrows gently at the waist, shaping slenderness without visible strain. Nothing pulls too tightly. Nothing collapses into looseness. Her figure appears balanced, contained within structure, yet not constrained by it. She does not offer herself as spectacle. There is no overt display, no theatrical emphasis. Instead, she inhabits her body with quiet control, as though posture itself were a language she has long practiced. Observers watching her from across the chamber do not separate fabric from form. They perceive the clothing, certainly the richness of its material, the steadiness of its line, but they also register the outline it suggests beneath a lined, proportionate, composed. The body and garment cooperate. Neither overwhelms the other. The result is coherence rather than drama. Now consider a woman in a rural setting standing at the threshold of a field or near the doorway of her home. Her body bears the marks of repetition, of lifting, carrying, bending. Her hands are strong, shaped by use. Her posture reflects endurance rather than display. The lines of her figure may not echo the elongated proportions celebrated in courtly art, yet within her community, other signals hold meaning. Strength suggests capability. Resilience suggests survival. The steadiness with which she moves through her tasks communicates reliability. Beauty here does not separate itself from function. It is intertwined with it. The body's value is read through its capacity to sustain labor, to withstand season and scarcity. The medieval aesthetic was attentive to such distinctions. It did not operate in isolation from lived experience. In years of famine, a body grown thin might evoke anxiety rather than admiration, reminding observers of fragility and lack. In more prosperous households, a certain softness could suggest security nourishment maintained against uncertainty. Preferences shifted with circumstance. They were not immune to environment. They responded to it. The body, whether slender or sturdy, was interpreted through the lens of survival and stability. Beauty, therefore, remained relational, shaped by context, read within community, and always measured against the conditions of life that surrounded it. This variability challenges modern attempts to project a single standard backward across centuries. The medieval body was not a static template. It was read through need, through theology, through hierarchy. What united these interpretations was the persistent desire for balance. Whether slim or softly curved, the admired body avoided extremes. It appeared governed rather than chaotic. Governance of the body echoed, governance of society in ways that were subtle yet pervasive. Medieval communities were structured through layers of authority, legal codes, customary practice, religious instruction, and the same expectation of order extended inward toward the flesh itself. Just as laws delineated who might wear certain fabrics and moral teachings warned against vanity or excess, the body was expected to exhibit signs of moderation. It was not merely a biological reality. It was a visible participant in a larger system of discipline. Proportion suggested restraint. Containment implied self-command. The well-governed body mirrored the well-governed realm. Excess flesh in certain contexts could invite interpretation as indulgence, as evidence of appetite unchecked by prudence. At the other extreme, insufficient flesh might be read as neglect, imbalance, or vulnerability. The visible body thus became a surface upon which moral assumptions could be projected. Observers did not see only weight or shape. They inferred habits, temperament, even character. Appearance was not detached from judgment. It entered the realm of meaning. And yet these inferences were rarely absolute. Medieval people lived within conditions where famine, illness, labor, and fortune shaped bodies in ways beyond personal choice. Knowledge of circumstance tempered interpretation. A lean figure during scarcity might evoke sympathy rather than critique. A fuller form within a prosperous household might suggest stability rather than excess. The moral reading of the body was filtered through context, through awareness of environment, season, and station. Discipline was expected, but it was understood within the realities that framed human life. There is also an emotional dimension that cannot be reduced to proportion or silhouette. Medieval literature, whether devotional or courtly, often speaks of beloved figures in language that fuses the visible and the inward. Beauty is described not only in terms of contour or color, but in terms of bearing how a person moves through space, how they incline their head, how their presence settles within a room. Physical description blends almost imperceptibly with moral tone. A beloved figure is graceful, not merely because of bodily symmetry, but because of composure, because of the quiet steadiness with which they inhabit themselves. The ideal is not inert, not a statue awaiting admiration. It is animated by restraint, by measured gesture, by the capacity to hold one's place without disturbance. Beauty in this sense becomes inseparable from conduct. We might imagine a feast unfolding within a great hall, its beams darkened by years of smoke, its walls alive with flickering light. Music threads through the air, weaving between conversations. Figures gather beneath the glow, bodies shaped by varied lives. Some appear slender within carefully fitted garments. Others stand broader beneath layered wool. The differences are visible, yet none exist in isolation. Light glides across faces and shoulders, catching texture, softening edges. Beauty here does not belong solely to a single outline. It emerges in relation in the way one figure turns toward another, in the rhythm of shared movement, in the alignment between body and fabric and place. It is relational rather than absolute. Even the simple acts of sitting or standing reveal proportion. A person who occupies space without overtaking it, who rises without abruptness, and lowers themselves with controlled ease, appears harmonious. The medieval eye was attentive to this integration. The body was not evaluated only in stillness. It was observed in motion and how it responded to environment. Beauty unfolded in these transitions, in the quiet negotiation between weight and grace, between structure and fluidity. And yet beneath this choreography, the body remained vulnerable to time. Aging altered the firmness of line. Illness could diminish vitality with startling speed. The admired figure of youth, balanced and whole, was never guaranteed permanence. This awareness sharpened perception. To appear healthy, to seem balanced and sustained, was not trivial in a world acquainted with fragility. It was fleeting. Beauty, therefore, carried an undertone of urgency, even if unspoken. As evening lengthens and candlelight softens contours within our imagined hall, distinctions of measurement grow less pronounced. Silhouettes blur gently into one another. The emphasis shifts from individual variance to collective presence. Bodies no longer compete for attention. They settle into rhythm. Each participates in the broader pattern of rank and role, of order and belonging. Harmony replaces scrutiny. The medieval body resists simplification precisely because it was never interpreted through a single lens. It was not uniformly thin nor uniformly full. It was read through circumstance, through the demands of labor, the expectations of fertility, the influence of medical theory, the weight of economic condition. Each context shaped perception differently. Yet across these variations, one principle persisted. Beauty lay not in excess, but in balance. Not in dramatic exaggeration, but in proportion that felt governed. If we listen closely once more beneath the rustle of fabric and the low murmur of voices, we hear again the refrain that is threaded through every aspect of this world: beauty must align. The body, like the face and the garment, must fit within pattern. It must suggest vitality without indulgence, strength without aggression, fertility without spectacle. It must appear held within boundaries rather than spilling beyond them. And in that governance, in that careful negotiation between flesh and expectation, we encounter the deeper truth of medieval beauty. It was neither rigid nor chaotic. It responded to belief, to environment, to hierarchy. The body existed as lived reality and as symbolic form at once. It carried the marks of survival and the aspiration toward harmony. In the dim glow of evening, it stands neither exaggerated nor diminished, but poised, balanced gently between necessity and ideal, between what is endured and what is admired. There was always a shadow moving alongside medieval beauty, a presence that did not extinguish admiration, but complicated it. No matter how carefully proportioned the body, how balanced the complexion, how modestly arranged the garment, the face could never be entirely innocent in meaning. It was admired, certainly, its harmony, praised its composure, noted, but it was also observed with alertness. Beauty did not float freely in a space of uncomplicated approval. It existed beneath a moral sky, one that cast light and shadow simultaneously. Under that sky, radiance could elevate, but it could also unsettle. The same luminous presence that drew quiet appreciation might just as easily invite suspicion. Praise and caution lived close together. The medieval Christian imagination was acutely aware of the power of sight. Vision was not treated as passive reception. It was understood as an active exchange. The eye was imagined as a gate, a threshold through which impressions entered the soul. Through it could pass temptation, envy, longing, distraction. To look was to engage. To be looked at was to exert influence. Neither act was neutral. Both carried consequence. Within this framework, the beautiful face, especially the female face, occupied a position of tension. It could be read as reflection of divine order, as evidence of harmony embedded in creation. Yet it could also disturb the discipline of those who encountered it. A well-proportioned countenance might reassure observers of inner balance and grace. At the same time, that same balance might unsettle the fragile restraint of others, stirring responses that required vigilance. Thus, beauty was never isolated from interpretation. It did not exist as a simple attribute resting quietly upon the face. It unfolded within an awareness that perception itself carried moral gravity. To be seen was to enter a field of meaning. The face could stand as emblem of virtue, suggesting inner harmony reflected outward. Yet that same face could stir longing, awaken distraction, unsettle composure. Serenity and temptation were not opposites fixed at distant poles. They hovered near one another, separated by intention and response. This ambiguity did not cancel admiration. It did not require that beauty be denied. Instead, it ensured that admiration remained alert. Appreciation was tempered by discernment. Medieval beauty, luminous as it might appear in candlelight or daylight alike, always moved within this charged space where sight and consequence intertwined. This tension was not confined to abstract reflection. It permeated the written culture of the period. Sermons, moral treatises, and devotional works returned again and again to the subject of appearance and its potential influence. Preachers cautioned against vanity, not because beauty itself was condemned, but because it could tip into excess. What began as care might become manipulation. What was intended as refinement might slide toward pride. The concern centered not on proportion or harmony, but on intention and effect. A face adorned too deliberately risked being read as an instrument of enticement rather than an expression of order. Cosmetics, though known and used, were therefore often approached with restraint. Their presence was acknowledged, but so was their capacity to blur the boundary between enhancement and concealment. The line between maintenance and deception could be narrow. A complexion that appeared improbably flawless invited scrutiny. Was it preserved through health and moderation, or crafted to mislead? Such questions lingered in communal awareness. Beauty, especially when intensified beyond what seemed plausible, prompted inquiry into motive. In this way, the medieval gaze remained interpretive, attentive not only to surface, but to what that surface might signify. It is important to understand that suspicion was not aimed at beauty in its essence, but at the possibility of its distortion. Medieval theology did not condemn the body as inherently corrupt. On the contrary, creation, including human form, was affirmed as fundamentally good, ordered by divine intention. Harmony of proportion, clarity of feature balance, of expression, could be interpreted as reflections of that larger order. To encounter a well-formed face was not automatically to encounter temptation. It could be to glimpse coherence woven into the fabric of existence. Yet alongside this affirmation stood a persistent warning. Pride superbia occupied a central place among the gravest sins. It was not beauty itself that endangered the soul, but the elevation of the self through beauty. If outward harmony fostered self-exaltation, if admiration hardened into vanity, the gift became perilous. Likewise, if beauty stirred envy or ungoverned desire in others, it threatened the delicate equilibrium of communal life. The face, therefore, bore moral weight that extended beyond bone and skin. It functioned within a network of spiritual and social consequence. Imagine a woman whose features draw attention wherever she moves, her forehead broad and luminous beneath soft light, her complexion pale, her posture composed with refinement. In one setting, she may be praised quietly as an embodiment of grace, her presence perceived as harmonious and dignified. In another, glances may linger too long, whispers may follow in her wake. The same features that elicit admiration may provoke speculation. Does she understand the effect she has? Does she encourage it even subtly? Does she dwell too knowingly within it? Such questions were rarely voiced openly, yet they hovered within communal awareness. Beauty, to remain virtuous, required humility. It had to appear unclaimed, unexploited. This dynamic shaped conduct in tangible ways. A person recognized as beautiful was expected to balance that outward brightness with inward restraint. Speech should remain measured, free of boastfulness. Laughter should not spill too loudly. Gesture should avoid theatricality. The more luminous the surface, the more careful the demeanor was expected to be. It was as though beauty demanded governance from within a steady discipline that kept radiance tethered to modesty. Without that internal governance, the harmony of appearance risked unraveling into imbalance. Thus, the beautiful face did not merely invite admiration. It required vigilance and alignment between outward form and inward humility that preserved both virtue and order. There were also literary traditions that dramatized the dangerous face. Courtly romances often depict love ignited at first sight, sometimes leading to loyalty and sacrifice, sometimes to chaos and betrayal. The beloved's beauty possesses transformative power. It can inspire heroism, but it can also destabilize judgment. The face becomes catalyst. Medieval storytellers understood this dual potential. Beauty was potent. It altered behavior. In religious art, this contrast becomes especially clear. Saints are rendered with serene countenances, their features luminous yet restrained. The glow that surrounds them does not agitate the eye, it steadies it. Their beauty seems to emanate from interior calm rather than surface display. The lines of the face are softened by composure, the gaze directed with gentleness or contemplation. Radiance in these depictions is ordered inward. It suggests humility, alignment with divine will, tranquility anchored beyond the self. The viewer is not unsettled, but reassured. Beauty appears as reflection of harmony properly oriented. By contrast, figures associated with temptation are sometimes portrayed with a different quality of allure. Their physical appeal may be heightened, their gestures more pronounced, their expressions edged with intensity. The beauty remains present, yet it carries a subtle disturbance. Something in the gaze, in the tilt of the head, in the tension of the mouth, hints at imbalance. The distinction is not the existence of beauty itself, but the direction in which it seems to move. Is it turned toward modesty and order, or toward disruption and excess? Medieval imagery answers this question visually. Orientation determines meaning. The medieval world also inherited older anxieties about enchantment and illusion traditions that cautioned against trusting appearances too quickly. Moral teaching often emphasized the possibility that outward form could conceal inward corruption. A fair face might not guarantee a faithful heart. Graceful speech might veil deception. This awareness did not demand cynicism, but it did require discernment. Scrutiny intensified precisely because beauty could mislead. Admiration, therefore, needed to be accompanied by interpretation. Yet suspicion did not extinguish appreciation. Medieval communities rejoiced at weddings, admiring the bride's appearance as part of celebration. Poetry lingered over descriptions of fair cheeks and bright eyes, drawing delight from harmony of feature. There was genuine joy in beauty, and that joy was not considered inherently suspect, but it unfolded within awareness. One could admire without surrendering judgment. One could praise without abandoning caution. The beautiful face remained a sign capable of pointing toward virtue or away from it, and because it was a sign, it demanded discernment. Consider again our imagined hall. Candlelight flickers across assembled guests. Among them stands a young woman whose features draw subtle attention. Conversations pause briefly when she enters. She does nothing overt to command notice. Yet the glow of her complexion and the symmetry of her features seem almost luminous in the dimness. Some observers feel uplifted by the sight, as though harmony itself had entered the room. Others glance away quickly, wary of their own reaction. The same face evokes both appreciation and caution. This duality reveals something fundamental about medieval beauty. It was never morally neutral, never a simple attribute resting harmlessly upon the surface. To possess a striking appearance was not merely to receive admiration. It was to enter a field of expectation that required attentiveness. The beautiful individual moved within a space where every gesture could be interpreted, where restraint and radiance had to remain in measured balance. Appearance carried implication. It shaped how one was approached, how one was spoken, to how one was remembered. Too much concealment could be read as a different kind of pride, as though beauty were being guarded or curated too carefully. Excessive modesty might itself draw attention, suggesting self-consciousness or subtle self-elevation. Yet too much display risked crossing into vanity, into the realm where admiration seemed invited rather than incidental. The medieval eye was sensitive to both extremes. It searched for alignment, for an ease that suggested beauty existed without being manipulated. The art, therefore, lay not in denying beauty, nor in amplifying it, but in inhabiting it lightly. To carry striking features as though they were simply part of one's given form, neither flaunted nor hidden, required discipline. It meant allowing harmony to be visible without turning it into spectacle. In this careful inhabiting this balance between acknowledgement and detachment, medieval beauty found its most stable expression. The suspicion extended to men as well, though it often took a different shape. While female beauty was frequently examined through the lens of modesty and temptation, masculine appearance was measured against ideals of strength and composure. Excessive grooming garments, too ornate gestures that lingered too long before a mirror, these could draw quiet critique. A man whose attention seemed fixed upon his own reflection risked appearing vain or unsteady. Masculine beauty was not expected to announce itself through adornment. It was meant to reside in structure and contain strength, in a bearing that suggested steadiness rather than self-display. The admired male figure aligned his appearance with restraint. Once again, balance prevailed. Care was acceptable. Conspicuous self-regard was not. Time, however, reshaped these tensions. Youthful beauty carried a particular intensity. It was associated with vitality potential, the promise of continuity. The young face, unlined and luminous, drew attention precisely because it signaled beginnings. Yet as years inscribed themselves upon the skin, the dynamic shifted. Lines at the brow or around the eyes did not automatically diminish presence. They could signify endurance, memory, survival. Suspicion that once accompanied radiance often softened into respect. The moral gaze, once alert to the volatility of youth, grew more contemplative before age. Beauty did not disappear, it transformed. It migrated from symmetry toward gravity, from brightness toward depth. Within the broader theological imagination, ultimate beauty was reserved for the divine. Earthly attractiveness, however striking, remained partial, a reflection rather than the source. It was transient, subject to time and alteration. This understanding further complicated admiration. To delight in human beauty was permitted even natural, yet it carried a reminder of incompleteness. The harmony glimpsed in a face was not final. It pointed beyond itself toward a higher order. Beauty became not an endpoint, but a signpost. Thus the medieval face lived under watch, not under hostility, but under interpretation. Every feature, every alteration, every nuance of expression entered a network of meaning. A beautiful countenance could inspire devotion or awaken longing. It could stir envy or invite caution. It could reassure or unsettle. It existed within a field far denser than simple aesthetic pleasure. To see a face was to engage in reading it. As evening deepens and shadows lengthen along the stone walls of our imagined hall, the intensity of scrutiny softens. Candlelight blurs edges. Faces that once seemed sharply defined grow gentler in outline. The luminous appear warmer, the severe more forgiving. Conversation hums steadily. Beauty does not vanish with the light's decline, it settles. It integrates into the shared rhythm of the room. No longer isolated as a point of tension, it becomes part of the collective atmosphere, woven quietly into the presence of those gathered. If we listen carefully beneath the murmur of voices and the faint crackle of flame against the hearth, we can almost discern that familiar medieval refrain rising once more through the air. Beauty must align. It must not swell into pride, nor tilt the balance of a room toward disorder. It must not provoke rivalry or unsettle the fragile equilibrium that holds community together. It must exist alongside humility, anchored by self-command. The face that draws attention is not perilous simply because it pleases the eye. It becomes dangerous only when its radiance loosens itself from restraint, when admiration shifts into dominance, when the visible begins to overpower the invisible bonds of hierarchy and virtue. Beauty untethered carries force, and force in a world attentive to order demands governance. Within that recognition rests the final nuance of medieval aesthetics. Beauty was never naively adored, nor casually dismissed. It was admired, certainly praised in poetry, illuminated in manuscript, acknowledged in ceremony. Yet it was also disciplined, interpreted through moral frameworks, weighed against spiritual teaching. It could inspire devotion and reverence, but it could equally invite caution. It belonged not solely to the realm of pleasure, but to the architecture of social stability. It shimmered under candlelight, luminous and composed even as it remained subject to scrutiny. The glow of a fair face in a dim hall was not only an aesthetic moment, it was an ethical one. And in this continual negotiation between radiance and restraint, admiration, and vigilance, we glimpse the deeper structure of medieval thought. Nothing visible was ever merely surface. Every contour, every gesture, every harmony of feature entered a wider web of meaning. The beautiful face was never just a face. It was a sign, a signal, a potential catalyst. It reflected inner equilibrium or threatened imbalance. It embodied virtue or risked pride. To see it was to interpret it. Thus, medieval beauty was never weightless. It carried consequence. It moved within a moral sky where light and shadow intertwined. And in that interplay, carefully measured, constantly watched, we discover once more that appearance in the Middle Ages was never detached from belief. It was bound to it, shaped by it, held within it. There is one object that has lingered quietly at the edge of every chamber we have entered, every hall we have imagined, every figure we have observed beneath candlelight, the mirror. Not the clear, expansive glass that greets us today with unforgiving precision, but the small, imperfect disc of polished metal bronze or silvered surface, slightly clouded, slightly dim. To look into such a mirror in the Middle Ages was not to confront a flawless duplicate of oneself. It was to encounter a softened presence, a blurred negotiation between light and shadow. Reflection was partial. It required interpretation. It invited imagination. The medieval mirror did not dissect. It did not press the face into harsh clarity or separate each feature for examination. It did not magnify the smallest irregularity or isolate asymmetry as a flaw demanding correction. Instead, it offered an approximation, a softened rendering shaped by metal light and shadow. Within that approximation, a person made small adjustments. A strand of hair was guided back into place. A veil was shifted so that it framed rather than obscured. The collar of a gown was drawn a little straighter, its line reasserted. The face, whether luminous with youth or gently marked by years, appeared in shifting tones, altered by the tremble of nearby flame. Reflection was fluid, never entirely stable. Beauty in this setting was not an object to be perfected through endless refinement. It was a presence glimpsed, briefly confirmed, and then released back into movement. There is something deeply fitting in this limitation. Medieval beauty was never intended to withstand relentless, isolated scrutiny. It did not belong under cold, unwavering light. It belonged to context, to the angled glow of sunlight filtering through a cloister garden, to the restless shimmer of torches lining a hall, to the ambient murmur of a marketplace alive with exchange. Beauty lived within these environments. It responded to them. The mirror did not detach the individual from that wider world. It prepared the individual to re-enter it. It served as a quiet hinge between spaces, from solitude to community, from the privacy of arrangement to the public act of being seen and interpreted. In its dim surface, one did not perfect the self. One aligned the self for participation. To look into a medieval mirror then was not an act of self-absorption in the way we might imagine today. It was not a prolonged encounter with an exact replica demanding endless correction. It was threshold work. The mirror stood between solitude and society, between preparation and perception. The individual did not ask, "Am I flawless?" but something quieter and more relational. Am I aligned? Is the veil arranged with modesty? Does the posture suggest composure rather than haste? Does the garment fall with the harmony expected of my place and moment? The reflection offered just enough clarity to answer these questions, no more. It invited adjustment, not obsession. In that dim surface, one rehearsed entry into shared space. Reflection was a brief pause before participation, a steadying breath before stepping into the gaze of others. And yet beyond this literal mirror, polished metal catching flame, there existed another form of reflection, far more enduring memory. Medieval beauty was not preserved through mechanical capture or frozen image. It survived through description, through narrative repetition, through art shaped by interpretation, through the steady accumulation of reputation. A fair face might be praised in verse, its harmony rendered into rhythm and metaphor. A luminous bride might be recalled in family story long after the feast had ended. A noble woman's bearing her measured walk, her composed presence might be recounted years after her youth had softened. Beauty did not vanish when candlelight dimmed or daylight shifted. It moved inward into recollection. It became something carried rather than merely seen. In memory, it was refined, repeated, and woven into identity. This gives medieval beauty a dual nature, at once fragile and enduring, fleeting and preserved. It is fragile because the body itself cannot remain unchanged. Skin that once held a certain pallor gradually shifts in tone. Hair that framed the face with fullness thins over time. The straightness of posture yields subtly beneath years of labor, childbirth, travel, or illness. The visible signs that once seemed so stable are quietly altered by seasons and circumstance. No feature, however admired, is exempt from time. And yet beauty endures in another register. What was once seen can be spoken of again. What was admired in youth can be recounted long after youth has passed. In the telling, memory intervenes. It softens harsher edges. It reduces awkwardness. It preserves the sense of harmony rather than the exact detail of form. What remains is not the precise contour of a cheek, but the impression of balance it conveyed. Consider again the noble woman standing by the tall window, her gown arranged in measured folds, her posture steady in filtered light. One day she will look into her polished mirror and notice that the broadness of her forehead now carries faint lines etched by expression. The luminous pallor that once caught daylight so clearly may have deepened into gentler tones. The silhouette that once aligned effortlessly with structured garments may no longer sit with the same certainty. Time inscribes itself gradually without spectacle. And yet in the minds of those who remember her earlier presence, another image continues to live, composed, aligned, serene. The figure, illuminated by candlelight in a great hall, remains vivid in recollection. Her beauty does not disappear. It becomes layered. The present self exists alongside the remembered one. Radiance shifts from surface to narrative. The same transformation unfolds far from courtly halls. In the village, the woman whose strength once defined her stride may find her hands less steady, her steps more deliberate. The endurance that shaped her posture may yield to the weight of years. Yet within her community, memory does not dwell solely on change. Stories of her resilience continue to circulate. She is recalled not for perfect symmetry, but for steadfastness, not for youthful proportion, but for constancy of presence. Beauty migrates. It moves from measurable contour to embodied history. It becomes less about how the body appears and more about how it has endured. In this way, medieval beauty was never entirely anchored to youth, though youth carried particular intensity. The luminous face of a young bride glowed with promise and expectation. The lined face of an elder glowed with continuity and survival. Suspicion that once hovered around youthful brightness often softened into reverence as years accumulated. The moral gaze adjusted its focus. Where once vigilance guarded against pride or excess, now respect acknowledged experience and perseverance. Beauty did not vanish. It altered orientation. It shifted from allure to authority, from potential to memory. What had once been admired for its immediacy came to be valued for its endurance, and in that shift, beauty revealed itself not as a single moment, but as a sustained presence woven through time. Theological imagination deepened this awareness. Earthly beauty was always understood as temporary, a reflection, like the mirror itself, of something higher and more permanent. No face, however radiant, escaped decay. No garment, however finely dyed, resisted fading. This transience did not render beauty meaningless. Instead, it gave it direction. It suggested that what was admired here pointed beyond itself. In devotional writing, the language of mirror and soul often converges with quiet intensity. Just as polished metal gathers and reflects the tremble of flame, so the properly ordered soul is imagined to receive and return divine light. Reflection in this metaphor is not passive duplication, but participation. The clearer the surface, the steadier the glow. Outer harmony, visible in balanced features, composed bearing moderated gesture, does not stand alone. It hints at inward alignment. The cultivated face, carefully governed, yet unforced, becomes emblem of a deeper aspiration, that heart, and will move in concord, that intention and action rest within proportion. Beauty in this vision acquires a vertical dimension. It rises beyond the horizontal plane of social approval and enters the realm of spiritual orientation. It is no longer solely about how one appears among others, but about how one stands before a higher light. The well-ordered exterior gestures toward interior clarity, suggesting that radiance can flow through the face when the inner self remains steady. Now imagine the great hall after the feast has ended. Music that once threaded through the air has fallen silent. Footsteps retreat along stone corridors, their echoes diminishing into distance. Torches burn lower, their flames wavering with less urgency. The brightness that animated fabrics and features softens. Garments are unfastened layer by layer. Veils are loosened. Hair once braided or bound with intention is gently released. In private chambers, small mirrors rest upon tables beside guttering candles. Faces appear for a final moment in flickering glow, less radiant, now less formal, then dissolve as the flame is pinched out. The day's carefully arranged harmony yields to shadow. Radiance fades, not in failure, but in completion. What was visible returns to quiet. What remains is not the blaze of appearance, but the inward steadiness that no extinguished candle can fully erase. What remains in the end is rarely the precise arrangement of features as they once appeared beneath torchlight. The exact curve of a cheek, the fleeting brightness of an eye caught in flame, these details fade more quickly than we expect. What endures instead is the memory of movement, of presence in relation. The slight inclination of a head while listening attentively. The steadiness of a gaze that did not waver. The balanced silhouette pausing at a threshold before entering a room. These fragments linger more persistently than strict measurements ever could. Beauty survives not as spectacle, not as a fixed image held rigidly in mind, but as impression and atmosphere carried forward through recollection. Beyond personal memory lies something broader and more deliberate legacy. Medieval society understood that a face could carry prestige beyond the span of a single lifetime. Effigies carved upon tombs present the departed in serene composure, their features arranged in calm symmetry. The sculpted face does not attempt exact duplication. Wrinkles are softened, expression steadied. The irregularities of lived experience are refined into equilibrium. The effigy does not reproduce reality precisely, it interprets it. It preserves alignment rather than imperfection. In stone, beauty becomes abstraction, held in symbolic permanence, even as the body beneath yields to time. This stylization reveals a deeper orientation. Medieval culture did not strive to freeze the living face in flawless accuracy. It sought to preserve harmony. What endured was not every detail of contour, but the sense of proportion, of order, of dignity. The afterlife of beauty unfolded not in physical preservation, but in translation. It moved from flesh into meaning, from presence into form, from moment into symbol. Even in everyday life, remembrance operated in a similar manner. Communities recalled not only how someone appeared, but how they carried that appearance. A woman remembered as graceful was remembered for the composure with which she moved, not merely for the symmetry of her features. A man remembered as dignified was recalled for steadiness of bearing, as much as for stature. In recollection, beauty merged with character. The external and internal ceased to be separable. What endured was the integration of form and conduct. There is, too, a quiet humility embedded in the medieval mirror's imperfection. Its surface, never entirely clear, resisted endless dissection. One could prepare before it adjust hair or garment and then step away. It did not invite obsession. Beauty belonged to participation in shared life, not to prolonged isolation before a reflective surface. It lived in movement, in how one entered a room, in how one listened, in how one departed, not in fixation upon detail. The mirror marked the beginning of presentation. The community completed the act of interpretation. In that exchange between preparation and perception, beauty found its place not as static object, but as lived alignment carried into memory. And so, as we arrive at the quiet stillness that closes this chapter, we find ourselves returning once more to that medieval refrain that has echoed sometimes softly and sometimes insistently through every hall and chamber we have entered. Beauty must align. It must find its place within proportion and vitality in youth, where symmetry suggests promise and health signals possibility. It must settle into composure and wisdom in maturity, where lines of experience carry their own gravity and restraint speaks more loudly than radiance. And in memory, beauty must align with harmony and story, preserved not as fleeting brilliance, but as balanced impression. At every stage, it remains bound to order. It must not loosen itself into excess. It must not detach from humility. Alignment is not a single posture, but a continual adjustment, a quiet recalibration between self and expectation. In the dim glow left behind by extinguished candles, the mirror offers almost nothing. Only faint shadow lingers upon its imperfect surface. The faces we followed pale beneath torchlight, luminous near windows, balanced in posture, watchful under scrutiny, withdraw into darkness. Their features blur. Their contours dissolve, yet their beauty does not vanish. It persists in layered forms, in the memory of those who once admired them, in the narratives that recount their presence in carved stone, that idealizes their composure in moral teaching, that interprets their radiance. Beauty becomes less a visible surface and more a sustained meaning. The truth about beauty in the Middle Ages resists simplification. It was neither rigidly oppressive nor naively indulgent. It was attentive, aware of consequence, It was contextual, responsive to climate, to health, to hierarchy, to belief. It was governed by theology and shaped by circumstance. It shimmered beneath scrutiny, never entirely free from interpretation, and yet it softened into story as time passed. It was never confined to appearance alone. It operated within a world where surface and soul were understood to converse with one another, where outward form hinted at inward order, and where visible harmony gestured toward invisible alignment. Perhaps then the final reflection offered by the medieval mirror is not a flawless image, but a quiet reminder. Beauty is not static. It does not exist in isolation. It lives in relation between body and garment, between face and gaze, between individual and community, between flesh and faith. It is always interpreted, always situated within meaning. It moves continually between what is seen and what is understood, between light and judgment, between admiration and restraint. And in that movement, in that constant negotiation, beauty reveals itself not as mere ornament, but as participation in a larger pattern, one where nothing visible was ever only surface. And now, as our journey through the Middle Ages gently comes to rest, perhaps what lingers with you is not darkness, but detail, a subtle adjustment of fabric, the careful shaping of a hairline, the quiet blending of herbs into a fragrant oil, the echo of footsteps in a bathhouse warmed by steam. These are not images of neglect, they are images of intention. The truth about beauty in the Middle Ages is not dramatic. It is not shocking. It is human. Medieval men and women understood that appearance carried meaning. A pale complexion could suggest privilege. A garment's color could declare wealth. A veil could express modesty or obedience or rank. Beauty was not merely about attraction. It was about belonging, about fitting into a world structured by hierarchy, faith, and reputation. And perhaps that feels closer to us than we expected. As you lie there now in the quiet of your own century, consider how many unspoken rules still shape what we call beautiful. How many signals we send without speaking. How often we adjust ourselves not only for comfort, but for recognition. The Middle Ages are not so distant in that sense. The codes have changed, but the instinct remains. If you've stayed with me until this final moment, thank you. Let me know in the comments what surprised you most tonight. Was it the perfumes, the laws controlling clothing, the moral debates over cosmetics? And once again, tell me where you're listening from. It turns this solitary hour into something shared, something gently connected. Now let your thoughts slow. Let the images fade like candlelight at the end of evening prayers. The manuscripts close. The steam cools. The mirrors darken. The Middle Ages can rest again, and so can you. Sleep well.